That tattoo doesn't exist in any military records, but I've seen it, on the body of a missing officer. Those were the words a former Marine whispered when he spotted Gideon Cole's left shoulder amid the smoke and flames of the Pittsburgh steel mill. An explosion, a life-saving act, and the faint ink reading I-9 to 86 awakened a secret buried for nearly 4 decades. Who is Gideon? Why was he forced to live as a nobody? And what could make the very system that once erased his name now erect a statue in front of the entire nation? All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a tale that will leave you speechless. Take a second to like the video and subscribe, and drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see people joining us from all corners of the globe. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, February. A biting wind whips through the rusted smokestacks, sweeping into every crack in the steel walls, as if intent on dislodging old memories. The once mighty steel city now lies cloaked in ash gray, and at its heart stands Carson Mill's aging plant kept alive more by human grit than by machines. At 4:30 a.m., while most of Pittsburgh still slumbered, Gideon Cole was already at the main gate. No warning siren, no welcoming committee, not a word of greeting. He swiped his badge and stepped inside like a time-worn fixture of the building, silent, sturdy, unnoticed, until he was missing. At Carson Mills, they called him Old Timer. No one knew his real name, and no one asked. To the younger workers, he was a curiosity, the first to arrive, the last to leave, never on social media, never joining anyone for lunch, always seated in a corner with his own lunch pail and a battered black notebook. "Watch out's about to start lecturing," one young engineer whispered when he passed by. "Betty was talking to that old machine last night." Another scoffed. Gideon heard it all, but did not flinch. Instead, he walked slowly toward the press area where he had worked for nearly 10 years, a rare zone, still semi-manual for safety reasons. A bitter irony, the least modern place was also the most dangerous. His hands were calloused and oak-hard, each finger scarred and cracked by heat, by time, and by forgotten deeds. He had once been the finest welder in a special military unit, but no one here knew. They only saw a quiet old man, gazing into the distance as if living in another era. That morning, inspecting press number 7. Gideon paused for a long moment. He laid a hand gently on the shaft and pressed his ear against the steel casing. A faint sound, a crack, uneven like metal under unbearable strain. He straightened and sought out the control engineer. "If I were you, I'd stop the press and inspect the compression shaft. There's a hairline fracture in the core," he said in a low, steady tone. The young engineer looked at him as one would an antique clock. "Thanks, Mr. Cole. But the software didn't flag anything. Our sensor system is far more advanced than your instincts." Gideon said nothing more and did not turn away. He merely looked into the young man's eyes, then gave a slight nod. He returned to his bench, pulled his notebook from his jacket pocket, and scribbled something in silence. The fluorescent light above cast a pale halo on his silver hair, as though he were set apart from the rest of the mill. A gust of wind rattled the door seam, bringing the scent of smoke, damp metal, and something that smelled remarkably like memory. Gideon looked up at the ceiling, where girders intersected like the bars of a time prison. He had seen this scene before, in a faraway place, a cold bunker, an ammunition cache, a decision no one dared claim responsibility for, and a loss never permitted to be named. No one at Carson Mills knew that the gaze of this man had once witnessed war closer than any of them, that he did not fear broken machinery, but the arrogance that repeats itself, a flaw that had buried his comrades and his own name beneath the dust of history. Gideon Cole had lived in silence for far too long. But that day, he began to hear a familiar warning, the steel tremble of impending danger. And deep inside, he knew something was repeating. And this time, no one would be laughing. Friday, light sleet pattered against the rusted tin roof of Carson Mills, leaving blurred streaks like memories still damp. Pittsburgh's sky was an unbroken leaden gray, not a single shaft of light reflected on the dusty window panes, much like the look in Gideon Cole's eyes that morning. He stood outside the engineering supervisor's office, hands sodden with icy snow, trembling slightly from the cold. In his hand was a hand-drawn schematic on yellowed paper, its edges neatly folded as if preserved in a military rucksack. Not a software-generated diagram, not a coded digital report, just an A4 sheet sketched in pencil, lines as sharp and precise as a plasma cut. Gideon knocked on the door. No answer. Pop music leaked through the supervisor's headphones, making the room feel even more distant. Finally, when Gideon entered, the young manager removed one earbud, swiveling in his chair with his hand still on the mouse. "Back again, Mr. Cole?" Gideon said nothing for a few seconds. He laid the drawing on the desk and gently pointed to the compression shaft detail marked in red. "I think you should look at this. It's the chain reaction if the compression shaft on press number 7 fails. It won't stop at one machine. The west line goes into cascade within 2 minutes. If pressure spikes, the whole workshop wing could collapse in under 5. The manager arched an eyebrow as though hearing some ancient legend. "You drew this with pencil?" He lifted the paper like an antique fax. "Really? It's the 21st century, Grandpa. We've got predictive software, AI, sensors, pressure alarms. And this is what you bring? Charcoal art?" He half smirked and returned the sheet to the desk without a second glance. Gideon did not show anger or surprise. He simply stood there, his hand brushing the drawing once, then withdrew it like placing flowers on a grave, full of respect, yet hopeless. "Just a warning," he said, voice steady but with a catch in his throat. The manager turned back to his screen. "No thanks. No further questions." Gideon turned and walked down the corridor. The sleet continued to fall, each flake melting on his shoulder, blending into the gray fabric as if the weather itself kept its silence with him. That evening, in the garage behind his small timber house on the outskirts of Wilkinsburg, Gideon opened the wooden cabinet beneath his workbench. His hands ran over each screwery, one bearing the mark of repairs he had done alone, without help. From the bottom shelf, he retrieved a small, old wooden box, sealed with a length of canvas webbing. He carefully untied the knot, as though unsealing a time capsule. Under the yellow garage light, he revealed 3 items: a worn brown leather notebook, its corners frayed, a military dog tag, the engraving faded, and a wartime photograph, its edges slightly creased. In the photo stood 5 men side by side in a forest clearing, rifles slung over their shoulders, faces streaked with grime and eyes hardened. All stared at the camera except one, Gideon. On the back he had written, "Iron Forge, 1986, never spoken of again." His finger traced those pencil letters, now blurred by time. Gideon sat on a wooden stool and opened the leather notebook. The first page held another hand-drawn diagram, a tactical map, marked with codes, arrows, and coordinates. But he did not turn the page. He closed his eyes. In his mind echoed an explosion, not at Carson Mills, but in a border warehouse where he had ordered a detonation at the last moment because the sensors lagged, where 3 of the 4 men in that photo never returned. His vow of silence then was not for honor but to save the lives of the survivors. Because the government had ordered their names erased from every record so the operation would never exist. And he had kept that vow, 37 years. But now, standing in a centuries-old mill on the brink of failure, not from enemy fire but from human arrogance, Gideon knew. Certain truths, if left unspoken, will repeat themselves. Only this time, he wasn't sure who would survive to tell the tale. Monday morning began like any other, cold, silent, and seemingly endless. The clock read 6:18. Droplets melting from last night's snow fell onto the steel gutters, echoing like a countdown. Carson Mills stirred to the clatter of engines, the grind of rolling shutters, and the harsh glow of industrial lights splashing across oil-stained concrete floors. Gideon Cole was already on site. As always, he spoke no words, drank no coffee, exchanged no pleasantries, only his measured footsteps, carrying the cold precision of a man who had survived by caution. But that morning, something in the air made him pause as he passed press number 7. There was a strange sound, indistinct like metal groaning under stress. Gideon narrowed his eyes. That same unbearable tension, that muffled creak he'd heard before. In an underground bunker, when a detonator delayed, just before disaster. 6:20 a.m. An explosion is not a sound, it is a shockwave. Dust and shards of metal blasted outward like artillery, tearing through the air and slamming into every surface. Press number 7 erupted, breaching its partition, and fire roared up like a blast furnace. Shouts rang out. Some workers scrambled away, others froze in place. The alarm siren belatedly wailed a few seconds later. But amid the chaos, Gideon did not hesitate. Without orders, he plunged into the smoke as though it were his element. His work coat hood drawn low, he navigated swiftly through blazing I-beams and cracked concrete. Secondary blasts echoed, pressure waves hurling everyone back except him. A young operator lay trapped beneath a fallen frame, his gas mask knocked off, coughing amid the black smoke. Gideon said nothing. He placed his coat over the man's face, then used his shoulder to lever the steel just enough to pull him free. No words, no pause. They tumbled out into a safer zone. The operator coughed violently as Gideon, his coat now singed, stood by, one sleeve torn away by the heat, revealing his shoulder. There, against sun-darkened skin and old scars, was a tattoo in military block letters, I-9 to 86. Faded and worn, but unmistakable to any service member, that was no random number. It was a campaign code. I-9, Special Action Unit. 86, the year. At the sight of it, a hush fell over the onlookers, not because of the flames, but because of what lay behind them. In a corner by the security door, a man in his 70s stood frozen. Marcus Bella, retired Marine who had served in Okinawa and later trained U.S. Special Forces technical teams, stared at the tattoo, his face paling. "It can't be," he whispered, stepping forward, hand trembling. "Iron Forge? I thought that entire unit was lost." Gideon rose, eyes still on the firefight being extinguished. He offered neither denial nor confirmation, but the way he stood silent, breathing evenly, eyes reflecting only endurance, spoke volumes. Marcus bowed his head, in silence, no explanation needed. Those who knew the truth recognized one another by a single mark. The fire was finally quelled. The chief engineer was evacuated. Fire crews arrived too late. And everyone at Carson Mills that day, for the first time, looked at Gideon not as old-timer, but at the tattoo and behind it, at a void no system could measure, a campaign erased, a man forgotten. But from that moment on, the truth began to crack the steel shell, and the name Gideon Cole was no longer just a shadow in the mill. He had stepped out of silence by the very act that required no words. Dear viewers, please relax, or grab a glass of water, then stay tuned for the rest of the story. More surprises await. Comment 1 if you're enjoying this tale, so we know you're still with us. Marcus Bell did not immediately step forward. He stood off to the side, beyond the cluster of onlookers still murmuring about the explosion, quietly staring at the scorch-marked back of Gideon. That tattoo, it could not be coincidence. I-9 to 86. He had seen it before, glimpsed in a top-secret report, like a ghost in records of the non-existent. His heart pounded, but his feet moved slowly. As he approached, he no longer saw the old welder who'd passed the guard shack these past months. Before him stood a fragment of history he had long believed buried. "You're Cole, aren't you?" His voice was hoarse and hesitant, as if afraid to misname something sacred. "Gideon Cole? Unit 4? Gideon did not look at Marcus. He was still kneeling beside the young operator, his scarred hand pressing a dressing to the man's burned leg. But at the mention of Unit 4, his shoulder gave a faint tremor. Marcus continued, I-9 is the Special Action Group, 86 is the year. The campaign codename, Iron Forge. A hush fell between them, broken only by distant sirens. Gideon rose slowly, brushing his hands on his pants, then looked up at Marcus. In his gray eyes was no surprise. No fear. Only acceptance, as if he knew this day would come, only not the hour. I remember your name, Marcus said quietly. Someone in my unit spoke of you, on our last night at the border. He said, there's a welder who never abandons his post, If anyone survives, it's because of him. Gideon nodded. A simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of a life lived among unspoken truths. He drew from his jacket pocket a small Objecta brown leather notebook whose corners were dog-eared. His hand shook slightly as he raised it, not from the burn, but from the memory stirring within. "We were ordered to not exist," he said, in a steady, measured tone. "Our names, our records, our deeds, all erased." The survivor stole to keep silent, as if we'd never been there. He gazed down at the notebook as though facing an old friend. "But I could not forget. I tried. I tried to live like a civilian, to sleep without waking in a start, to breathe welding smoke without recalling gunpowder. But it was impossible to forget." Gideon's eyes drifted as he spoke. He was no longer at Carson Mills. He was back at that far-off place, a cold Eastern European forest, an enemy cache buried beneath the earth. The faint golden glow in his night vision goggle lenses sand, the scent of burned bodies over a dead radio crackle. Our team was trapped when the exit collapsed. We triggered the charge from inside 3, did not make it out. I was the one who placed the final block. And I set the failsafe so the enemy believed bombs still remained. Marcus stood silent. He asked no follow-up. Some confessions need no confirmation, they carry a truth that no paper can convey. The ache of sacrifice. Gideon gripped the notebook, then offered it to Marcus. "The first pages are their names, in my own hand, because I would not let their names vanish again." Marcus received it with both hands, handling it as though it were a precious artifact. He gave a solemn nod. "Keeping it is the easy part," Gideon murmured, his gaze fixed on the smoky distance. "But living with it, that's the hardest burden." No one spoke further. Yet in that silence, recognition passed between them, not by medals nor speeches, but by two veterans meeting eye to eye. One the bearer of memory, the other its witness. And that tattoo once hidden beneath a work jacket had become the living cipher of a past no system could continue to conceal. A past no longer destined to remain in the shadows. Marcus Bell couldn't sleep that night. He sat in the guard shack, fingers resting on the brown leather notebook Gideon had given him. The midnight wind rattled the thin window slats, mingling with the rare patrol cars rolling past the mill. Under the dim glow of the desk lamp, he read each page. The handwriting was bold, slanted to the right, penciled without a tremor. The first page listed names, ages, unit codes not of Gideon, but of those who never returned. The next was a campaign map, arrows, symbols, coordinates. Then came the entry soon adorned, objective, painful exactly as a soldier would recall. Around 3 a.m., he photographed several pages, the operational overview, the weapons cache map, and Gideon's field journal written after returning. He sent the images to his daughter, Naomi Bella, freelance YouTube journalist, specializing in military history investigations. Less than 12 hours later, Naomi published a video titled, "The Mysterious Tattoo of the Rescuer Welder." The video opened with footage of Carson Mills engulfed in smoke and flames, then cut to the charred I-9-86 tattoo on Gideon's left shoulder. Naomi's calm, measured voice asked, "Why does a 63-year-old welder in Pittsburgh bear the secret code of an unacknowledged military operation?" She continued, "And why, after saving a life, did he refuse all recognition, saying only, 'I just want everyone to get home safely'?" The clip reached 2 million views in 48 hours. Comments flooded in like a storm surge. Hundreds of veterans recognized the journal's symbols, terminology, and operational codes. A user named Rick Havoc 47 wrote, "I was in Berlin in September '86. I heard U.S. special operators mention Forge during a continuous radio blackout. This is real." A retired intelligence officer emailed Naomi, "Iron Forge existed. I saw the operation map. The orders were signed by a senior commander, later removed for excessive classification. I remember one name erased: Cole. Now I know why." Mainstream media could not ignore it. The Pittsburgh Gazette ran a front-page story, "The Welder and the Government Secret, Who is Gideon Cole?" Within 3 days, Gideon's name graced the front pages of local papers and exploded across veterans' forums. Former special operators, technicians, interpreter Saul came forward to verify details from the journal. Some even visited Carson Mills not to protest, but to stand at a distance and look at the steelworks where the Oath Keeper had welded each seam in silence for nearly 2 decades. The mill launched an internal inquiry. Unlike past incidents, this time there was no cover-up. A closed meeting took place, and though no press release was issued, an internal memo circulated. Employees deserve to know with whom they work. And when someone has held an entire front line together to survive, we no longer call him old-timer. Gideon was invited to speak at the union meeting that weekend. A makeshift podium was set up in the mill lobby, still scented with smoke. Nearly every worker attended. Some wore T-shirts printed with the I-9-86 emblem, the same pride they reserved for their favorite sports teams. Gideon took the podium, no notebook, no notes. The overhead lights revealed every wrinkle and scar, neither hidden nor embellished. He spoke just one sentence, no more, no less. I just want everyone to get home safely, no matter who I am. The hall fell silent, then someone applauded, then another, and soon the entire mill erupted, not for the speech, but for what had been missing too long. A mirror held up by action, not by promises. Gideon Cole's story was no longer a secret. It became a symbol that heroes do not walk red carpets, but through fire, not by business cards, but by calloused hands and a faded tattoo. And it all began because one man refused to let the truth rust away once more. 2 weeks after the explosion, Pittsburgh's sky still wore the stagnant gray of an unarrived spring. But that day on the grounds of Carson Mills, a very different atmosphere blazed to life. The main gate opened early. A silent procession flowed inward. Workers in spotless safety gear, veteran soldiers wearing old service pins on their left chests, even high school students following teachers' instructions. Today we will witness a lesson never found in textbooks. There were no fluttering flags, no red banners, only a small courtyard beside the old mill, where a makeshift wooden podium stood and, beside it, a cloth-covered frame awaiting its unveiling. Gideon arrived early, as always, but today he carried no lunch pail and wore no faded work coat. His borrowed suit hung a bit loosely, clearly not tailored, but his collar was crisply pressed, and his shoes, though well worn, had been polished to reflect the morning light. He stood at the edge of the crowd, not pushing to the front. His gaze took in the courtyard as one might watch a memory come alive. No one called him old-timer anymore. They addressed him by name, greeted him with firm handshakes and respectful nods. Colonel Marcus Thorne opened the ceremony. He stepped onto the podium holding a small velvet-lined box and spoke with a slight tremor of emotion. There are medals awarded at the right time, there are medals awarded at the wrong time, and there are medals never awarded because the truth was hidden. He paused, then looked directly at Gideon. Today, the Department of Defense formally acknowledges the existence of Operation Iron Forge and the command role of Mr. Gideon Cole, who led the team that destroyed an illicit weapons stockpile on the Eastern European border in 1986. The mission was an absolute success. But for security reasons, all records were destroyed, and the identities of the participants went unrecognized. Marcus opened the box. Inside lay a replica Medal of Honor, not gleaming like most, but forged in steel according to the original 1986 design, the same metal Gideon had worked with all his life. He stepped forward to Gideon's side to gentle applause, steady, rather than frenzied, each clap a belated atonement from a community that had long overlooked him. Marcus placed the box in Gideon's hands, 37 years late, but never too late to say thank you. Gideon did not open the box. He held it in both hands and raised his eyes to the crowd. His gaze was not wet with tears, but something shone, not sunlight, but the relief of a burden finally lifted. "I never imagined I'd hold this again," he said in a voice as deep as a welding arc. "And honestly, I don't need it, but if this reminds anyone of those who never came home, then I will keep it for them." No one applauded after that. Not for lack of feeling, but because no one wanted to shatter that precious silence. The ceremony ended as the cloth was pulled away. Beneath stood a bronze bust of Gideon Colis, face neither smoothed nor idealized. Every wrinkle, every line, preserved exactly as he was, a real man. His pose, one hand clutching a welding helmet to his chest, his eyes cast into the distance and not searching for anything, but standing guard over a vow he swore would never be repeated. On the stone plinth beneath, one simple inscription: Silent Oath Keeper, Iron Forge, 1986. Gideon did not pose for photos with the statue. He did not take a selfie or go live on camera. After the crowd dispersed, he paused before the memorial, quietly placed his hand on the inscription and then turned and walked away. But that day, his steps were lighter, no longer weighed down, no longer silenced by obligation, but choosing silences he always had, needing no one's attention, only doing what was right. There are heroes who need no applause. They live among Usain factories, auto shops, or the corner gas station carrying memories of a world they once sacrificed to protect. Yet it is precisely that silence which speaks most powerfully, that honor lies not in medals, but in what we uphold quietly. The story of Gideon Cole is not merely about war or belated recognition. It is a reminder that each of us carries a piece of the past perhaps forgotten, but never lost. And sometimes, listening to an old tale can heal an entire generation. Thank you for watching to the end. If this story has touched you, please hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below where you're watching from, and who in your life deserves to be remembered as a silent hero. Share this video with a veteran, because perhaps today is the day they finally get heard.